you guys, this is part 2 of chapter 9 on viruses. So, very important that you guys understand that viruses are not classified as living organisms. They're not alive because they're not made of what? Cells. They're not made of cells, so we're not defining them as living things. So they're molecules. They're highly organized molecules. They have protective coats, so they're like these little molecular machines. Okay? So you need to remember that. They're very small. They're way tinier than the smallest bacteria cells, and they can replicate, but they need to do it inside a cell. They're definitely a parasite. And what's crazy is they do evolve. And evolving is one of the characteristics of life. So they do have some of the characteristics of life, just not enough to make them living. They are first first discovered in 1892, so a while ago. Now, you also need to make sure you remember this. They have nucleic acids, but they don't have both of them. They either have DNA or RNA. Now think back to last lecture, last class. They work together, RNA and DNA, don't they? To get the proteins from the DNA, what needs to be made? RNA. Right. Okay? So, and it doesn't have it. So it needs to get in a cell and use the RNA molecule that the cell can make. I don't know if it's just because the uracil difference, I don't know what it is. Or vice versa. They have RNA, but they don't have DNA. So their code is in the RNA, in a single strand of RNA. Now there's, like I just said, it's either or. So there's two kinds, so we call them DNA viruses, the ones that have DNA. Examples are the cold virus, not the flu, the cold virus, and there's a bunch of them, and bacteriophages. And I'll show you a picture about bacteriophages in a minute. Then there are retroviruses, and it left. You guys see that? Don't I have another thing on you guys' paper? I don't know what it's about. Okay, so the ones that only contain RNA, so their codes in their RNA, are called retroviruses. And it's retro because they're going backwards. So, right, we go DNA to RNA to proteins. Well, they don't. They go RNA to DNA. Then they make RNA off the DNA, or I don't even know. I'm confusing myself. But anyway, they're going backwards. They start with RNA, and they're going to have to decode it into DNA. Okay? So HIVs are retrovirus also. The flu, all the flu viruses, influenza we're talking about, are retroviruses. Okay, so this is the bacteriophage. There's the HIV virus. So a bacteriophage, people get confused with the name. They think this is bacteria, right? But that's not what it is. It's a virus that infects bacteria. Follow me? I think phage has something to do with like eating. And so it eats bacteria. It's kind of how it was named, if I got that straight. Okay, so pretty complex. They remind me of little machines. Okay, now, how do they replicate? How do they reproduce? There's two cycles that they could be following. The first one's the lytic cycle, and we'll watch a little video here in a second. These types of infections, the host cell enzymes replicate the viral DNA, and then the DNA goes through protein synthesis, and the parts of the virus are being made. They're just proteins, and it's assembled together inside the cell. And so you're using the cell that it's inside to make many copies of the viruses. When there's so many viruses in that cell, it bursts out of the cell. And that's why these infections, give us these other symptoms, because it's hurting us. The lysogenic, this one reminds me of like soldiers, like a military getting ready. So we have viruses all over our bodies. They're teeny little things. And just like we have bacteria all over the place. Lysogenic, though, is like the virus is being dormant. It's not hurting you. All it's doing is getting your cell, though, to copy the instructions for it. And when you go through cell division, so when your cells replicate, they're replicating the new DNA that's in there, or the new RNA that's in there that was put in there by the viruses. So what it's doing is, as you're just, living and doing your job, your cells are copying and making more and more copies of the virus inside your body. Then, when you don't get enough sleep, don't take care of yourself, get overstressed, whatever, your immune system is a little weak, then they wake up and go, okay, this is the time to attack, this is time to get out of this body, even and spread to other bodies, and then they switch to the lytic infection, and then those genes start getting expressed. Does that make some sense, you guys? There's a nice little animation, so here we go.
Beginning with infection of viral DNA from a bacterial phage, there are two paths of viral replication. In lytic infections, the host cell's enzymes replicate the viral DNA. Viral genes are transcribed and translated on the host's ribosomes to make proteins for the outer capsule. New viral particles assemble. When there are many new viruses, the cell lyses or breaks open and releases them to infect other cells. In contrast, in lysogenic infections, the viral DNA, or a DNA copy of the viral RNA, inserts into the cellular DNA. It is copied when the cell replicates. There is little or no production of new viruses. Instead, the genetic information for the virus is passed along to new cells. Sometimes an external stress, such as starvation of the host cell, activates a lytic cycle of replication.
Okay, so the easy way to remember this is lysogenic. See the genic, like genes, genetics. So I remember that one's just copying its genes. Make sense, you guys? Lytic is where it's going to lyse the cell, it's going to bust out of the cell. Okay. Okay, so impact, you guys realize that they're harmful to cells. They can cause, bad symptoms. They could even cause death. Also, how they're spread, okay? So humans themselves have increased the spread of viruses globally because of how we're traveling and moving around on our globe. Same thing with our agriculture, right? Anything that we're moving around can also be spreading the viruses. I do want you guys to realize that when we call this the swine flu, and the doctors said, no, stop calling it swine flu. You're going to make people scared of pigs. They think they're getting it straight from pigs. And that was not the case. So we started calling it H1N1. There's the bird flu, right? Same thing. People get scared of birds. So it is very rare that the viruses can jump hosts to a different type of host. They're programmed, their genes work just perfectly with that host. If they get to another organism, it doesn't invade it, it doesn't work the way, they can't reproduce in a different organism. Now hold on. Now, we do think that the swine flu, H1N1, possibly, we don't know this for sure, but there's, probably close to a theory with this, right? We don't know for sure, but we have some evidence that sometimes they can cross and they can go to a different species with the organisms that are in very close contact with each other. So we think maybe the swine flu came from people working with the animal. The swine had this type of virus, and just taking care of the animals, slaughtering the animals, being in that much contact for generations, just random luck. The viruses are mutating, and then one got into a human, and it was so mutated compared to the original swine virus, it was able to live in humans. So it's very difficult for it to happen, but it does. But it takes time. It's not like you guys can just go visit one of these farms and for this to happen. It's like a co-evolution where the humans together with the pig for a while that it happens. Same thing with the birds also, okay? Yes? Yeah, so rabies, is rabies viral or bacteria? Does anybody know? I think it might, I don't know. Okay, extra credit. Find out two things here. If we think, is rabies a virus or bacteria? Because then the same sort of thing happens with bacteria and even protozoans that are parasites, right? That they have very specific hosts. The better they are at surviving, the more general they can be with their hosts. I think bacteria, there are some more generalized bacteria that are lucky enough to be able to contaminate a couple hosts. Or some use it for different parts of their life cycle, like malaria. It's in the mosquito as a vector for a while. It needs that mosquito for a part of its life. Then it gets passed to mammals. So I'm curious about the rabies. So just post it on Edmodo if you find the information. Do the research. I'll give you a little extra credit. You got to be the first one, or you got to add on to what somebody said. Okay. Okay. So just with our movements, we are spreading them around the world. Now that could be bad, or that can be good also. Does that mean our immune system is getting better also? And you guys all know the stories with the explorers and the colonist people, right, that went to areas, brought new germs to those poor people, and wiped out populations, right? You guys know about this. So since we're traveling around a lot and more slowly mixing up things, then we get a better chance to get our own antibodies and our own resistance compared to wiping out a whole group of humans. But we still need to be careful with that. Or we get vaccines before we go visit an area, right? Because we know about it. Okay, now something really cool. We have figured out to use viruses to move genes for us. These are small, and they're, like you saw, the picture of those viruses, that was a bacteriophage. That was a virus infecting a bacteria, E. coli. So they can inject their genes, right? So if we give genes, like human genes, to the viruses, give them chunks of DNA, we can then, and then they absorb, they collect DNA all the time, so do bacteria. Bacteria want genes. Hey, it might be something good that I can use, this gene. Maybe it makes me have a different coat, so now that antibody won't attack me. So they share genes, so they'll readily take up genes that we give them. Now we stick all those viruses that have all that human gene. Let's talk about let's go an insulin-producing gene for diabetes. So now we inject these viruses into people, into what gland makes insulin? It's the pituitary? Good. We inject that into the pituitary. Now there's viruses that are attacking the little cells, and these are viruses that we have made sure that aren't going to hurt us, that they're carrying what we want. They're injecting now a gene to make insulin. So now the pituitary gland is making insulin for these people that aren't normally making insulin. So pretty cool. And there's lots of uses that we can do with this. That is a form of genetic engineering. You are giving genes to an organism to help cure something. And that's it, right?